An interesting question about the spiritual exercises that is pretty common in every age is, to what extent have the spiritual exercises changed and adapted to various times? So we know from the early history of the Jesuits that Ignatius had shared his notes with some of his first companions, but really gave them a great deal of leeway in terms of how they would give the retreat. But for the most part, the retreat was given by a single individual to a single individual. And the exercises generally followed the outline that we have, but not slavishly so. It was much more flexible and free. For example, St. Peter Faber is known as the best, Ignatius said, was the best at giving the exercises. And it seems that he varied the exercises compared to what Ignatius did. So it was not something that was rigid. As the society grows and develops and institutionalizes, the exercises became more fixed in how they were done. Another thing that happened, which was, depending on where you are in history, a good thing or a bad thing, is they became popular. So instead of one person giving a retreat to one person, they became preached. So one preacher would give the same kind of points or exercises that a director would give, but instead of giving it to one person, it would be to a church full. That changes the dynamic. The people might still be having very good personal experiences, but they're not reflecting those personal experiences with a director. So what begins to happen is the resolution, the effect of the exercises is going to be seen only in what they do after the exercises. So what are the things that they begin to practice as a result of their experience of the exercises? This becomes the dominant way of making the spiritual exercises for the period leading up to the suppression of the Jesuits in the 18th century. And it remains so into the 1960s, when the church calls us to look at our original charisms, and the individually directed retreat comes back into the fore. And there's a lot of problems with that individually directed retreat, because it's very difficult to train someone to do it well. It's very difficult to maintain retreat houses with that kind of clientele, but it's a very rich experience. What often happens is that people's first experience of the spiritual exercises will be in a larger context, at a preached retreat, at a gathering, and maybe in a shorter context, over a weekend, over 5 days. And only after they've had a sense of the value of that kind of prayer might they be invited, or might they ask to go and make a directed retreat of a longer time. Another thing that Ignatius realized from the beginning was that 30 days for most people was very difficult to have. And so he made it very possible for people to make the long retreat or the spiritual exercises in different ways, either at home over the course of several months, or in 8 days over 3 years, going through each of 4 years over each of the weeks of the exercises. So again, Ignatius was very flexible. Those flexible ways of giving the exercises were adapted and used in various places. A very interesting part of the history of the Jesuits is how the spiritual exercises were adapted in mission countries. So the Jesuits in Canada were eager to have native people giving the exercises, because they could use their own languages, their own images, invite people to their own understanding of God's will for them. So there's been a lot of adaptation and change, but I think always relatively faithful to the flexible exercises that Ignatius envisioned.